All right, welcome to the fall semester and welcome to Criminal Law, CJC 131. This is an online class and this is the first in a series of online lectures that will be available for you to view and will be at your disposal to cite, use as a resource, use as a learning source, and also you can use this information in your assignments and just make sure you cite the material, cite this video, cite the textbook, as discussed in your welcome video. I discussed a lot in welcome video about how a lot of my classes are heavy writing classes, and this one is no different. But before we get too deep into that, I want to make sure you have the right textbook. So this is what your textbook should look like. Either the e-version or the hard version. It won't have the white border on it, but that's what it should resemble. So make sure you have the correct textbook. It is Criminal Law today, the 7th edition. So since my welcome video already covered a lot of the minutia and the day-to-day housekeeping issues, let me get into just some content here for Chapter 1, Week 1. I'd like to go over just a few definitions, and we'll start off with the law. After all, it is a criminal law class. So let's talk about civil law versus criminal law. So this is a criminal law class, but we need to know the difference. So criminal laws are the things that you can be incarcerated for, imprisoned, fined. You can get up to the death penalty. Those are all violent. When you violate criminal law, those are the types of penalties that you can expect. However, civil law, what is that? Civil law is when somebody wrongs another person and there's a lawsuit. So when there's civil litigation, it's just a matter of making something right, making somebody whole. If you crash into somebody's car, not necessarily a crime outside of additional information, just merely crashing into somebody's car. And if you don't have insurance, which is a crime, but you wouldn't, you'd only be punished for the insurance portion, not necessarily crashing a car. It's an accident, right? They call it an accident. So there's no malice. What is the consequence? What are the repercussions of crashing into somebody's car? If you didn't break the law, you can't go to jail, right? But you can be sued. That person needs to be made whole. The person whose car was crashed into needs a new car, needs money, needs a replacement, something like that. So they can file a lawsuit, a civil lawsuit, and that's a violation. Now you're fighting over civil law versus criminal law. Let's talk about another comparison. Let's talk about natural law versus positive law. So natural law, those are the types of things that are just people know should be wrong. You shouldn't do this. You don't need a law to tell you to do it. Whereas positive law is legislation. The government or the governing body, a legislative body has said, this is now against the law. So natural law. Do we really need a law telling us that it's against the law to murder? Or that you shouldn't murder? Probably not. You probably, societies probably don't need that law. There's a lot of minutia about what is acceptable homicide, self-defense, things like that. However, we all know that straight murder is wrong, and you shouldn't do it. Whereas the example I used in another class was if you open a business and you want to put a really big billboard over that business. Well, some municipalities say you can only have this much billboard. This much is too much. So they limit the size of signs because they don't want their towns to look messy. Would you know that if somebody didn't tell you? Probably not. As a human, in our souls, we probably don't know that it's wrong to have a sign that's too big outside of what the municipality's legislators have decided. You need somebody to tell you that. That's a positive law. So that's the comparison. Things that you already, just being a human, you know are wrong versus things you have to be told are wrong. So our laws are broken down into, usually our criminal law is broken down into three categories. Felonies, misdemeanors, and infractions. Felonies being the most serious of the three. Felonies are the things that you can actually be imprisoned for lengthy sentences. So what are our sentencing options? So we have fines, short incarceration, long incarceration, and death penalty, right? You'll see that in the book. So let me back up here. I'm going to start with infractions instead. So infractions, what can you get for an infraction? Can you get the death penalty for an infraction, which is like speeding, running a stop sign, changing lanes without your signal? No, you can't get the death penalty. All you can get is a fine. You can get a ticket, which is a fine. But a misdemeanor, what's a misdemeanor? One of the other classes today, we talked about vandalism. Vandalism would be a misdemeanor. Battery, assault, theft of under a certain amount. Those are all misdemeanors. So what are the penalties that can go with misdemeanors? Well, you can get a fine, just like the infraction, or you get a short incarceration. Usually, misdemeanors are limited to 1 year of incarceration at the very max, outside of consecutive and concurrent sentencing. Let's jump up back to felonies again. What kind of sentence can you expect for a felony? Well, you can still get a fine. You can get a short incarceration, or you can get a lengthy incarceration, or you can get the death penalty in the case of murder or some very few exceptions to murder that you may still get the death penalty for. Those are the three categories of crimes and the penalties that are associated with those. So I spoke about legislators, I spoke about the government and the government telling you where or what is wrong and what is illegal. I know you've learned this in civics class, but we're going to review it. The three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. What does the legislative branch do? They make laws. Right? They're the ones who write our laws. Sometimes they can pass them without a vote on our part. Sometimes it needs a vote on the part of the public, depending on the type of law. But in general, the whole job of a legislator, Congress, House of Representatives, the Senate, things like that. And also it comes down, you have similar in the state level. But their whole job is to make laws. In fact, you'll hear them called lawmakers because that's the whole point. Second, executive. The president is his branch, the president and his employees, his staff, that is the executive branch. And then finally, the judicial branch. Judges, courts, things like that. So if the legislative branch makes the laws, is there an exception to that? Yeah, the judicial branch can, in a way, affect or change law, if not make law. And that's called case law. If a decision is made by a judge and it impacts future decisions, then that's called case law. The Latin term for that, you'll see it in the book, and you may even see it on some exams, stare decisis. Stare decisis. And that means to stand by things decided. When one judge makes a decision and other judges fall in line with that decision. Let's talk about an example. The Miranda rights. Did a senator or a congressman or a representative write a law that said, hey, from now on, you need to read these 5 things to a suspect when you're going to interrogate them while they're in custody? No, there is no Senate bill, HR bill. There's no bill that ever said that needs to happen. That came from a case where a guy named Miranda was arrested in Arizona. He wasn't advised of those rights. He ended up appealing his case. It went to an appellate court, a Supreme Court case. And Miranda v. Arizona, that decision that they made is now followed as law. So now, by law, in some situations, arrestees, offenders, those who are in custody and are going to be interrogated, must be advised of certain rights, now called Miranda rights. But you see that the judicial branch is able to make law, not just the legislative branch. So that's interesting. The other interesting thing about the judicial branch is it's adversarial. That's how we get due process. If you're accused of a crime, then the prosecutor is going to present their case, But you also, usually through your attorney, you also have an opportunity to present evidence. And those two combating forces, those two competing forces, the prosecutor and the defendant, each battling about what is true. That's the adversarial system that we have. There are some systems that are not adversarial around the world. There are some systems where only just one side gets presented, and somebody isn't allowed to present their side. Or some places you're allowed to only present in writing your defense, whereas the prosecutor can present in verbal arguments. Is that necessarily as adversarial if it's not equal? Are you really getting due process? We're fortunate in this country that you're able to have that due process, but there is an exception to that adversarial system, and that is the grand jury system. The grand jury system is when somebody is suspected of a crime, and instead of them being arrested, they are their case is presented to a grand jury outside of their presence, outside of their defense counsel's presence. Just one side is presented, just the prosecutor is presenting the evidence that they have, without that being adversarial, without that being competed against. And after hearing just one side of the story, then a grand jury decides yes or no, this case should proceed to trial. So the defendant, the offender is still afforded the opportunity for an adversarial jury trial, but the decision to go to that trial is not adversarial. That's the exception to our system. So this week we have some Pearson assignments. Make sure you get those done. And we have a discussion board post that is content driven, and we also have a discussion board post as an introduction. I expect both of those to be done. Any other assignments, if there are any quizzes or tests, they will be in the week 1 folder. Make sure you pay attention and complete all assignments in the Revel and in that folder. If you have any questions, check for my contact information and my office hours, and I look forward to reading all of your submissions. Those discussion board posts are due on Wednesday, the initial post, 300 words minimum, with 2 references to include in-text citations. And your responses are due by Sunday night. No, you don't necessarily need to include references in those. However, if you do make a statement that needs to be supported by a reference, don't plagiarize, make sure you cite your sources. Watch the welcome video if you haven't already. It'll give you a lot of information about plagiarism and the APA system that's expected. I'm not going to sweat you a lot about the APA system in your discussion board post, as long as you try to get it in that format. I know that website is a little difficult to make all your spacing, but show me that you're actually making a proper citation. If your spacing is a little off, I'm not going to, if something should be centered and it's not, I'm not going to give you a hard time about that. But if you're not making any attempt at all, you will lose points. All right, I look forward to reading your submissions, and I will talk to you soon.